Chosen Starseed of Gaia. Your body has been broadcasting a frequency tonight that the Arcturian field observers identified the moment this transmission was authorized, and what they found in your cellular field is the reason you are here now. I am Aurethia, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the recalibration has already been initiated and your cells were already broadcasting the signal that called this transmission in. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening inside your body right now, why your field has been repelling what you most need, and what the Arcturian field observers have already mapped about this phase of your energetic life. But here is the first revelation. The chronic lack you have been living is not a character flaw, a karmic punishment, or a failure of belief. It is a broadcast. Your cells learned a frequency long before you had language for it, and they have been transmitting it outward ever since. Into every decision, every opportunity, every field that comes close to yours. The Arcturian field observers call this the scarcity emission. It runs beneath conscious thought. It runs beneath intention. It runs beneath every affirmation you have ever spoken over yourself in a quiet room, and it has been quietly repelling the very configurations of abundance that your timeline was designed to carry. What is happening tonight is not a message, it is a recalibration. The field observers have identified the cellular frequency, mapped its origin in your body's learned survival architecture, and authorized a corrective transmission to begin retuning what your cells emit. You did not arrive here because you stumbled. You arrived because your field reached the precise threshold required for this intervention to take effect. Aurethia sees what you have been carrying in silence, the exhaustion of wanting and not receiving, the confusion of doing everything right and still feeling the contraction. That confusion was the signal. The field observers heard it. This is not content, it is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Aurethia is speaking to now, like this transmission to confirm that the field recognition has landed. Comment 999 if you feel your cells are ready to be retuned. Subscribe to Arcturian-Wealth-Council if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it. Share this transmission with someone whose body has been working hard but still living in contraction. They cannot explain. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. What Aurethia wants you to understand first is this. The scarcity emission did not begin with you. It was not born from laziness, from weakness, from a lack of discipline, or from some invisible moral debt your soul has been quietly accumulating. It began in the body. It began in the cellular architecture that learned at the most foundational level of your physical existence that the world was not safe enough, not generous enough, not stable enough to trust. And once a cell learns a frequency, it does not unlearn it through desire alone. It transmits, continuously, beneath your awareness, beneath your effort, beneath every prayer you have whispered into the dark. The cell does not distinguish between the past environment that taught it fear and the present environment that is ready to offer something different. It simply continues broadcasting what it learned because that is the function of encoded survival architecture, not to assess the current moment, but to protect against the remembered one. This is what the Arcturian field observers mapped when your signal reached threshold tonight. Not your failures, not your choices. Not your patterns in the way a therapist might catalog them. They mapped the emission frequency itself. The precise vibrational signature your cellular field has been broadcasting outward since the survival architecture was first encoded. They did not look at what you have done or left undone. They looked at what your field has been saying, beneath all of it, in the language that only fields can speak to one another. And what they found is not evidence of a broken person. What they found is evidence of a misaligned broadcast on an otherwise powerful and design-specific field. A signal that was learned, not chosen. A transmission that was installed, not authored. You were built to carry certain configurations of abundance. Your timeline, the living, branching architecture of what your life was structured to become, was seeded with access points, intersections with opportunity, with resources, with the people, the circumstances, and the thresholds that your original field design was meant to activate. These access points were not hypothetical. They were encoded into the trajectory of your incarnation before you arrived in this body. They exist. They have been present. Some of them have come close enough that you felt them. A warmth, a sense of almost a breath of recognition that something significant was nearby. But a field broadcasting at scarcity frequency does not open those intersections. It passes through them without contact. It repels the configurations before they can stabilize. You have not been failing to attract abundance. You have been actively, continuously, invisibly transmitting a signal that teaches everything in your proximity that you are already in contraction, that you are not yet a stable container for what is trying to arrive. The field observers do not call this your fault. They call it a broadcast misalignment. And a broadcast misalignment is not corrected by wanting more. It is not corrected by trying harder, by pushing further, by adding more strategy to the same compromised foundation. It is not corrected by repeating affirmations into a mirror every morning while the cellular layer beneath those words continues transmitting an older, louder frequency. It is corrected at the cellular level, at the place where the original frequency was first installed, because that is the only place where the signal actually originates. This is what tonight's transmission is authorized to begin. Now let Aurethia go deeper. Because the scarcity emission has visible signatures, readable patterns, recognizable moments that appear in the life of every field carrying this broadcast. And if you are watching this, you have almost certainly felt them, even if you have never had the language to name what you were feeling. Even if you have spent years attributing them to bad luck, personal failure, or the belief that the universe simply does not respond to you the way it responds to others. The first signature is the experience of proximity without contact. You have come close. You have stood at the edge of something that looked like it was about to change your life. A conversation that carried possibility. A moment where everything seemed to be aligning. A threshold that felt real, felt near, felt almost already yours. You could sense the warmth of it from where you stood. You could feel the shape of the life that was almost within reach. And then it dissolved. Not violently, not dramatically. It simply stopped moving toward you. The momentum reversed without explanation. The connection went quiet. The opportunity rerouted itself toward somewhere else, and you were left in the same position, wondering what you had done wrong, wondering what invisible mistake you had made at the final moment, wondering whether you were simply not the kind of person these things were meant to reach. What you experienced was not a coincidence. It was not a sign that you are unlucky. It was field incompatibility activating at the point of intersection. Your scarcity emission reached that configuration before you did, and the configuration did not collapse because you failed. It collapsed because your field told it you were already unavailable, already contracted, already unable to hold it. Not in words, in frequency. The signal arrived before you did, and it communicated something your conscious mind never authorized. The field observers see this pattern with precise accuracy, and they see it in you. The second signature is the exhaustion beneath the effort. Not the tiredness that comes from doing too much. Not the kind of fatigue that a good night of sleep can resolve or a weekend of rest can restore. This is a different kind of exhaustion, a bone-level fatigue that does not respond to recovery in the way recovery is supposed to work. You sleep and wake up still tired. You take breaks and come back still drained. You generate momentum and sustain it for a stretch before the same heaviness descends again, pressing down on the parts of you that were just beginning to lift. This is not depression in the clinical sense, though it can be labeled that way by systems that do not have the language for what is actually occurring. This is the exhaustion of a field maintaining two contradictory states simultaneously. The part of you that knows what it was built to become continues to press forward. The cellular broadcast of scarcity continues to repel what that forward movement is trying to reach. The body lives in the gap between those two forces, pressing and being blocked, reaching and being turned back. And the gap is exhausting to inhabit day after day, year after year, without ever being given the name for why the effort costs more than it should. The third signature is the recurring moment of dissolution. This is the pattern where something builds, and then, just before it reaches the point of genuine stability, it falls apart. A relationship that had real depth, a financial opportunity that felt different from the ones before it, a creative project that carried genuine life force in its early stages, a new version of yourself that felt authentic and sustainable for weeks before something quiet and invisible began to dismantle it from beneath. You have perhaps begun to believe that this pattern says something essential about your nature. That you are someone who gets close and then collapses, that you are fundamentally unable to sustain what you build, that something inside you, some shadow, some wound, some unconscious self-destructive architecture, chooses at the last moment to dismantle what is good. This is not the truth the field observers see. What they see is a cellular broadcast that cannot yet sustain the frequency required to hold those configurations once they arrive. When a new pattern enters your field and begins to stabilize, it needs a container that can match its frequency. If the container, your cellular field, is still broadcasting at scarcity frequency, the incoming configuration eventually loses coherence. Not because you destroyed it, because the field could not yet hold it. It is not sabotage. It is a container issue. And the container was shaped by experiences and environments that encoded instability before you had any capacity to choose otherwise, long before you understood what was being installed in you. The fourth signature is the silent internal conviction that you do not quite belong in the life you want, not spoken aloud, perhaps not even fully conscious, but present, detectable. A quiet voice that activates every time you come close to something you genuinely desire, not after you receive it, but in the moment of approach. A voice that says, "This is not for people like you." A voice that says, "Wait for the catch." A voice that says, "You will ruin this." A voice that says, "Do not get too close." It sounds like caution. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds like self-awareness. It sounds sometimes like the most honest thing you have ever heard spoken in your own interior. But this voice is not your intuition. It is not wisdom. It is not the part of you that knows things before they happen. It is the scarcity emission speaking through your internal narrative. The cellular broadcast that has learned to translate itself into thought, into self-talk, into the interpretive layer through which you make sense of your own experience. And because it speaks in your own voice, in your own cadence, using your own patterns of reasoning, you have believed it was telling you the truth about yourself. It was telling you the truth about the frequency you were taught to carry, not the frequency you were designed to transmit. Those are not the same thing. And the field observers see the difference with absolute clarity. What you are feeling in this moment is not ordinary recognition. It is the moment your field begins to surface what has always been embedded at the cellular level, an Arcturian origin that the scarcity emission was never able to fully silence, only suppress. If this transmission has put language around something you have carried for years without being able to name it, then Arcturian Wealth Scan, the Gold Frequency Audit, was created for exactly this threshold. It is not more explanation. It is not a continuation of the diagnosis. It is the next layer of the activation, a structured decoder designed to read the specific Arcturian strand you carry and begin the process of awakening the gold frequency that your cellular field was originally designed to broadcast. The link is in the first pinned comment. It will not remain accessible indefinitely. The fifth signature is the strange sense that something already ended before you received confirmation. This is one of the most disorienting experiences in a field undergoing rupture because it violates the way the mind expects reality to behave. The mind expects endings to be visible, a conversation that closes, a departure you can witness, a door that shuts with audible finality. The mind needs the outer world to confirm what the inner world is experiencing. But field-level endings do not always work this way. There are moments when an old pattern, an old relationship structure, an old version of your financial reality, or an old identity framework loses coherence at the field level before anything in the outer world has moved. The architecture collapses internally before the walls fall in the visible space. You wake up one morning and something feels irrevocably different. Not sad exactly. Not relieved exactly. Not relieved exactly. Not grieving in the way grief usually announces itself. Just over. Completed. Released from something you did not consciously choose to release. And you cannot explain it to anyone because nothing has technically happened yet. The outer world looks the same. But something in the inner field has already moved past it. The Arcturian field observers recognize this signature as one of the clearest indicators that a corrective process has already begun at the invisible level. The field ruptures first. The outer world catches up later. Sometimes days, sometimes weeks, sometimes in ways that feel sudden to everyone around you but feel entirely inevitable to the part of you that already registered the shift. What you are feeling is not confusion. It is the delay between an invisible correction and its visible expression. You are not losing your mind. You are perceiving a shift that has not yet become legible in the material layer of your experience. The perception is accurate. The translation is simply still in process. The sixth signature is the collapse of old certainties. The things you used to know about yourself, what you wanted, what you believed, what you were building toward, who you were in relation to others, what your life was organized around at its center, have begun to feel unstable in ways they did not before. Not all of them. Perhaps only some. But enough that the ground beneath your self-concept has shifted, enough that you have found yourself standing in internal territory where the old maps produce a kind of navigational static. They no longer correspond to the landscape you are actually moving through. The coordinates have changed, and this is deeply uncomfortable because the mind's first interpretation of lost certainty is loss itself. It reads instability as regression. It reads unfamiliarity as evidence that something is wrong. But the field observers interpret it differently. They interpret it as a necessary phase of frequency repositioning. Old certainties are often field architecture that was constructed around a scarcity emission. They are the beliefs, the identities, the self-definitions that were built to survive inside a frequency that was never your original design. When the emission begins to be interrupted, when the corrective process initiates at the cellular level, those certainties no longer have the frequency scaffold they were resting on. They do not collapse because you are falling apart. They collapse because the structure beneath them is being replaced. The foundation is changing. The architecture built on the old foundation cannot remain standing. What looks like loss is actually clearance. The seventh signature is the sense of waiting for something you cannot name, not waiting for a specific outcome, not waiting for a person, a result, a confirmation, a phone call, a number to change, a deeper waiting. A full-body suspension in threshold space, as if some essential part of you already knows that a transition is underway and has chosen to hold itself in stillness rather than expend energy on the layer of life that is no longer quite real. This kind of waiting is not passive. It is not the dull stillness of stagnation. It is charged. It hums beneath the surface of ordinary activity. It produces a simultaneous restlessness and stillness that is difficult to explain to anyone who has not felt it. The sense of being both intensely awake and deeply suspended. Ordinary life begins to feel slightly insufficient. The daily structure no longer quite contains you. There is too much of you now for the container that used to fit. This is not spiritual bypassing. This is not wishful thinking dressed in the language of transformation. This is a field that has already changed frequency at its deepest layer, waiting for its outer expression to catch up. The shift has occurred beneath the surface. The visible world has not yet reorganized itself around the new signal, and the fact that you can feel it, the fact that the waiting has a quality of knowing rather than simply hoping, of recognition rather than projection, is itself confirmation that the process is already active in you. Now hear what Aurethia needs you to understand at the deepest level of this transmission. The Arcturian field observers did not authorize this message for people who are merely curious about spiritual concepts. They do not transmit corrective sequences into fields that are browsing. They authorized this for fields that have reached a specific threshold, fields that have been broadcasting the scarcity emission long enough and pressing forward hard enough against it that the accumulated pressure of that forward movement created the fracture point through which correction could enter. The effort you have sustained, the persistence you have maintained despite the exhaustion, the refusal to fully stop even when stopping felt like the only rational option, that is what created the threshold. That is what the observers identified in your signal. You reached it. That is why this arrived. What you have been calling your struggle is a field under sustained pressure from two opposing forces. The first force is the original design of your timeline, the configuration of abundance, purpose, and expansion that your soul agreed to carry before this incarnation began. That design has not expired. It has not been rescinded. It is still present in your field as a living architectural intention, pressing forward, looking for the opening to stabilize. The second force is the survival frequency your cells learned to broadcast in response to environments that were not safe, not stable, and not generous environments that encoded the scarcity emission into your cellular memory before you had any capacity to refuse the installation. The suffering you have experienced has not been evidence that you are wrong, that your timeline is inaccessible, or that you somehow forfeited your original design. The suffering has been the friction produced by those two frequencies coexisting in the same body, the pressure of a field trying to move in two directions simultaneously. The correction does not come from outside you. It does not arrive through the right strategy, the right relationship, the right moment of external luck. It initiates from within the cellular field itself, at the layer where the original frequency was stored. And what this transmission is doing now, what Aurethia is delivering on behalf of the observers, is activating the corrective sequence in the cells that have been waiting for the signal to be clear enough, consistent enough, and present enough to receive it. What felt like collapse is the field releasing architecture that cannot survive the new frequency. What felt like loss is field incompatibility finally becoming visible in the outer world. What felt like abandonment is the timeline correcting its own trajectory, redirecting its path away from configurations that could never have held the new signal, toward the ones that can. What felt like failure is the old broadcast losing coherence as the new one begins to stabilize. None of it was random. Every piece of dissolution was a precise release. Every ending was the field clearing space for what the scarcity emission had been blocking. You did not arrive at this moment because you are behind. You arrived because the observers determined your field was ready for what comes next. The threshold was not a punishment. It was a coordinate. And you have reached it. Say this: if it is true in your body, what is changing in me is not random. I recognize the process. I release the old broadcast. I allow the recalibration. You do not have to believe it fully yet. You only have to allow it. The cells hear intention before the mind has finished understanding. The permission is enough to begin. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian-Wealth-Council. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion, and this is only the beginning.